Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we discuss the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kirsch.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
We pick from the thousands of business books out there and test the author's ideas by comparing them to real-world challenges. With over 40 years of projects between us, we've got quite a bit to compare against.
We give you the condensed takeaways, followed by our interview with the author. We know you want actions, not theories, and it is actions that we want to help shape, because that's what the Wicked Podcast is all about. Hello everyone, and welcome to the season finale of the first season of the Wicked Podcast. I'm Marcus Kirsch.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
As you probably heard just 5 seconds ago. So for the last episode we thought we were going to do something slightly different to the benefit of all of us. And we were thinking, we just had 7 books we went through. We had this extraordinary opportunity to talk to the authors more deeply into their ideas and what the books are all about. And we thought, well, let's really have a more concise look towards what are the main themes, not just of the individual books, but of, let's say, the first 7, and if there's still any commonality there. Because we are fully aware, like I'm sure a lot of you out there, which is that there's so many books, everyone describes it differently. Are there actually common themes? Are there actually common themes that are actually translatable into reality, into what you'd like to do in your organization tomorrow? And so we thought, we're going to go through all the 7 books, have a look at the themes, summarize it up yet again, have a bit of a deeper conversation amongst us two, and do that. And see what we can pull out and see what you lovely people out there think about it.
Yeah, for me, reading 7 business books, I've been reading business books kind of all of my professional career. The thing that was really great about this is we got a chance to actually speak to the authors and then actually kind of look at how their thinking can be applied to real world situations. Because like we say, what we want to do is give you actionable insights. So not only was this reading more business books, but actually getting to probe and ask some relevant questions that are timely and relevant today.
Yeah, and what we're really hoping for is exactly that. This is why we've been always trying to push ourselves a bit more to really get some actions out. This is why we're doing the slides with each episode, in case you have been downloading some of those. And we really want to be pragmatic about it, not too conceptual and theoretical, even so theory should be at the basis of this. But in the end, as we all know, reality eats strategy for breakfast, and other quotes and metaphors here. And we know how important it is and how complex the reality of any business is, how unique every business is, and therefore how complex these things can be. And we want to help simplify this a little bit. So here we are. And maybe let's start with having a look at the overall themes so far that we saw. So let's start with a big one, literally at the top of things. And by the top of things in this case, I mean why an organization exists and what their main priority should be. So one of the probably biggest surprises, at least for little old me, because maybe I'm not that well read and I'm not a legal expert, is I was always thinking that one of the major priorities legally nearly for a leadership team in an organization is that it has to maximize shareholder value. So let me just play what Graham Boyd in one of our episodes actually said, and let's listen to a bit of a revelation there, at least for me and maybe some of you out there.
One of the big myths that has emerged in the past half century is that a company exists to maximize total shareholder return. And that's actually a myth that has emerged in part because of economic thinking and neoliberal thinking, bringing that in as, let's call it makeup after the fact. But if you look at, for example, in the UK, in England and Wales, the way that company law is actually written, what's written there is that the executives of the company have a duty to enable the company to maximally fulfill its purpose. There's nothing in company law in England and Wales that says that purpose has to be maximizing total shareholder return.
So I have to say, I was really surprised at this, because I really take a lot of people to task for the short-sighted decisions that they're making, because they believe that the only choice they have is to maximize shareholder value. And right now, British Airways is one of those companies. But what Graham is saying is that actually that isn't true. And that actually adds more weight to the fact that companies can indeed be driven differently in the way they make decisions without violating the tenets of the law in which the corporation was formed.
Exactly. So for me, it was a really, really big shift in actually mindset, because if you're saying that's not even a legal requirement, then leadership up there really doesn't have that big of an excuse to say, well, we should be focusing on that. I think there's a bigger argument even therefore now to make, to say, look, we actually know that this is not the major requirement here. Apart from the obvious fact that, if I increase customer value and I therefore make more sales and I focus more on the customer, of course I can increase the value of the company. However, there's other ways to increase the value of a company, of course, that we all know, anything from, buybacks to whatnot. And none of that takes care or cares about the customer value, really.
And the other thing is, a lot of these things take time. To actually build long-term customer value takes time, and so many of these shareholder kind of drives R&D quarter by quarter by quarter. If you don't meet your numbers this quarter, you're dead.
Exactly, and I think that also brings me back to one interesting point, and we will listen to him a bit later about another subject matter, is Tom Peters, who said, when they were talking to, or the story about the CEO of Avis, and when he wanted to turn around the company, same thing, was saying, don't wait for a return of investment in the first year. It will not happen within the first year. And I don't know when, how, and exactly, none of us was in the room then and there, exactly what his argument was and why he could do that against this shareholder value, short-term benefits.
But he sold the long-term vision. And he actually got the board of directors to buy into the long-term vision.
Exactly. In whatever which way this went, they committed to, this will not happen tomorrow. This needs to grow, especially if it's a bigger change, especially if it's, so the long-term benefits, which there's so much evidence all the way out there from McKinsey and other research that this actually is better for any company out there, is now becoming a better argument given that particular revelation. So that was Graham's great contribution to hopefully all of us out here to go, it's not a thing.
Right.
So the next thing we have is theory or system X and Y. So we've got Tom Peters talking a bit about that. Should define yourself via competitors is a bit too detailed. I don't think we need to do that. I think, so that group for me is about, if you want to break down silos, if you want to enable people, then the whole managerial thing has to change, right? So we can talk a bit about that. So I can play Tom's thing about how System X basically fucked up people when he wrote the book back then, and he's seen it working for companies. But you'll see what he says and what's outside of that, because he talks people first. So I think from the silos to people first, enabling them, giving purpose is sort of that part mainly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you? Oh, cool. So the next step, or the next group, is sort of the next step to this, right? So when we talk about being able to ask a question, being able to pivot, that means we're talking about somewhat a redistribution of governance and decision making, because, if you want to prove that certain things just don't work, and you likely have to try 100 things, if you run everything through the manager and the higher middle management, that doesn't scale anywhere and it makes no sense. So that means you got to enable people. You gotta start to live with the assumption that people actually can do this. So let's listen to Tom Peters about some of the stuff he found back in the 90s and see how that sounds like.
Okay.
I'm in a empathetic mood, but relative to managers and leaders, I'm in a brutal mood. I have been saying since we started the Research for In Search of Excellence in 1977, put people first. And, when we did the research in 1977, which led to In Search of Excellence in 1982, there was a big theoretical part of that book, which I doubt that any practicing managers read. But, I did it for my conscience, if nothing else, because I had just gotten a PhD in organizational behavior at Stanford. And, we went back to McGregor and we went back to Chester Barnard. And I don't remember how far we went back. We didn't go back quite to Adam and Eve, but we said there's a strand here. And probably McGregor is the most public godfather of it all. Theory X and Theory Y. Theory X beat the crap out of people, and Theory Y treat people as if they were, basically intelligent human beings. And so, I just am working on a new book, and it has 2 cover pages. And the first cover page deals with the excellence thing, and the second cover page just has 2 words on it: people first. And I said to somebody, this is my summa, this is my last act. And I've been saying people frigging first for the last 43 years. Won't somebody please listen?
That was a really good interview with Tom. There were so many highlights that I took away from that. But he is right, putting people first. Unfortunately, a lot of businesses don't get that. They still want to manage by kind of Theory X, which is, I read an article in LinkedIn this morning. Somebody's actually being required to provide time cards, not just of the hours they're working at home, but the actual what time of day they're actually putting those hours in. So truly micromanaging those kind of things. But pushing this whole idea of people first. And the other person, I don't think we've got something from Sonny to play, but Sonny Giles talks about helping people and enabling people at the coalface who have the first party data to make the decisions that they need to make at the beginning. And that's another thing. And I think overall, people first, people are your most valuable asset is trite, it's worn, it's old, it's ancient, and yet nobody does it. Everybody gives it lip service, but nobody's actually doing it.
Yeah, but that seems to be the problem because, so yes, Sunny talked a lot about leadership and enabling exactly that. So you're absolutely right. She was really strong on that one. But I see the paradox. So there's a paradox between whenever you talk to any company, even when you talk to, consultants that we are, it's all about headcount, right? How can you reduce headcount? We're in COVID-19. A few million people have just been furloughed, right? Or actually already been fired. The ones that are furloughed, as some people already say, 40% of those jobs will not come back, which is a very, very dire situation. Why is that? Because companies tend to do what they've always done, not because it works, but because that's the main thing they know how to do. That's the strategy that's been pounded into them since anyone's been in business school. And that's a really, really odd thing. And I just listened to some other, I think it was something on the news where there was a whole discussion about the second round now in the US to support the salary, right? Mm-hmm. So people who are absent of work or being furloughed, to give them some money. And there's a massive discussion about it because the current government says, we don't want to do that. Whereas most economists say, no, when things go down and dire, you should invest into the future more than ever. Invest, not cut down. Yet we all know, it's very likely that companies will just do that. They'll cut down and then, unfortunately, or likely, cut away the actual knowledge and the energy and the drive they actually need, which is the people, right? But I see it at the same time that oftentimes in companies, the learning is quite failing. So I think companies are struggling with the talent. And the longer people are sitting around, the more expensive they get for organizations. And they're not learning, so they're not really creating more value. But my theory is, or from what I've seen, is that, you're actually not training or enabling people at work enough. Therefore, they're not growing in value. So it's actually your own fault that people are not becoming better value for you. And if that changes, as Tom evidenced, he said, no, that's how this works. You invest in people, you do that. Companies are in servants of the people. Like the servant leader is a thing. And it actually helps. Every time it's been applied, as he says, as Sonny says, it's working. So you're only getting into trouble of having to cut people because they're not increasing in value if you're not doing what's obvious and what's been proven to be right. And that's a really odd paradox that that's not in place.
Yeah, and I know he's polarizing for a lot of people, but Gary Vaynerchuk was on LinkedIn just the other day saying that exact thing. My employees don't work for me. I work for them. Yeah. And that kind of a servant leader mentality is hugely valuable. But I want to go off in a slightly different direction, and hopefully the listeners will give me a little bit of a time on this. So in the UK, Rishi Sunak has done two different things. He's done the Eat Out to Help Out campaign, and right now he's talking about a 2% tax on internet purchases to drive people back to the high street. And you know what? Both of those things are trying to restore the economy and restore the system, which was terribly broken, back to the way it was before, rather than taking the opportunity to actually redefine and letting companies do what they need to do to be able to redefine themselves. And here's the tie-in: redefine themselves by focusing on their people and coming up with new ideas and coming up with new approaches and new business models. All they want to do is go back to the way things were before, which is theory X: work your hours, pay your bit, get rid of expensive people, because people are nothing more than a big number on a spreadsheet that gets in the way of maximizing shareholder value. And I'm done with my rant. Until the next one.
Yeah, great rant. I'm sure we're going to have another one. Yay. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about in a second when we talk about the remaining two themes here, because I think there's another one for innovation where exactly that comes into play. Great stuff, really.
So I think all of these things, as we're moving along, part of the thing we've got to do is help people understand how do they measure and what do they measure. We were talking about KPIs and OKR a minute ago, but do you measure an improvement in efficiency or do you measure an improvement in effectiveness?
Yes, and I think learning is quite a thing there, right? So we're talking about an iteration and learning process of, failing as a value, those kind of things. And I think there's plenty of people talking a lot about that. But let's hear from Jeff Colvin, who did we had a really great conversation with about learning, in particular deliberate learning, which is brand new science insights into what actually makes a difference between just spending 10,000 hours on something or actually learning that it actually lands, which is a significant difference.
If you get a chance, please listen to that episode, because it talks about a definition of what is deliberate practice and how that is so much different than just doing the same thing over and over for 10,000 hours.
Exactly. So let's start with what he said about feedback.
Feedback on the results is continuously available. This just makes sense. You can't get better if you don't know how you're doing. If you're working on something but you don't get any feedback, two things are guaranteed to happen. One, you won't get any better, and two, you'll stop caring because you're not seeing any results. So you have to get feedback continuously. Another finding about it is that it's very demanding mentally.
So before you jump in, I know we're both always kind of talking over each other, but we were talking about this particular comment after the interview and feedback. And I always thought you needed to have external person kind of giving you that feedback, an instructor, a mentor, a shaman, someone else. And tell the story you were telling about skateboarding, because skateboarding feedback doesn't require any outsiders.
No, it's sort of, well, yes and no, exactly. So there's a mixture between that the community itself thrives through failure. There's a lot of feedback loops in there in your close friends, really, because your friends are going to be the one who are skating with you, and they see you fall on your face many times. And they're not going to laugh at you, right? It's actually everyone's in there in this effort of, they know you're going to fail 95, 98%, and there's the few percentage times where you land things.
What are the two kinds of fails?
So yes, one of the most famous skaters in the world, Rodney Mullen, who we really want to get on because he wrote a book about it. So he talks about sustainable failure, right? So he says sustainable failure is the one where you actually can get up, but the terms I've been using is to slam or to bail, right?
Those are the words I'm looking for: slam and bail.
Exactly. So you want to bail fast, because bail is the one where you see things coming that they're going wrong, and you basically pull the plug mid flight, mid jump, whatever you're doing, and therefore you can land on your feet and you're not going to break your bones. Whereas a slam is this very severe, unpredictable thing, because you actually haven't thought about it or you haven't considered that scenario, and you will likely hurt yourself, right? So that's the damage. You can't replicate, you can't slam that often, because you're going to break something, and then your day of skating is over, right? At least for the day or for weeks, as we know, some come back from horrendous crashes and slams. But the bail thing is what everyone essentially does 100 times a day, and it's normal and it's fine, and everyone knows what it is, and it's one of the first things you learn, not unlike in judo, where one of the first things you learn is actually how to fall,
Right.
So it's an interesting community that has embraced failure like that, and therefore is really good at deliberate practice.
And so if we could help the business community understand how to apply bail versus slam to minor, trivial, small experiments, they would accelerate the overall process. They'd have more bails, they'd know when the bail was coming because they've been listening and learning, and they'd have fewer slams.
Absolutely. I think it would be I think for every organization it would be a value to move from only having failure as one thing and being able to suddenly do, we can actually produce sustainable failure, and we know there's still a percentage left that we will fall on our face. But most of the time, 98% of our times, we will fail, but it will be fine. We're going to get back up. We're going to have learned something. We actually have created some value. And I think it's a significant difference.
Cool. What's next?
So the other thing we talked about, which is really interesting, I think, and you made a really, really good point here, which is about grunt work. And grunt work being one of those things where, again, you talk about deliberate practice, where you do things 500 times, you experiment, you try bit by bit. And we claimed a lot of millennials might not like that. I think generally people don't like that. I don't always like it. But let's listen to what Jeff said about grunt work.
How do you think that fits?
Yes, absolutely. And I can tell you that I hear a lot from people about exactly this. Yes, what you're saying is absolutely true. And people who have been through it, I think, all understand the truth, the validity of what you're saying. The work you do in the entry-level jobs may seem like drudgery, but those who take the right approach to it, it's just what we were talking about earlier. Those who see it as something that they want to get better at and who focus on the details and are trying to learn will find when they look back that it was incredibly valuable to them. So, yeah, I think there is a great opportunity to do just what you said. In other words, frame it in a different way and probably rearrange the procedure a little bit. I can imagine ways it could be done that would help remind people or show them in the first place that they are actually learning critical skills.
And not just learning critical skills, but building the foundations upon which they can become to the point they have mastery within their craft. Because I think in the point I was trying to make, and he was good enough to justify and to validate the point, today a lot of people feel like they're just being given grunt work, and a lot of people who are in senior positions just give the grunt work. But if you spin that around and make it a series of deliberate practice, that yes, it's essential tasks, they're not very complicated, but if done right, they form a foundation. The person doing the tasks can feel like, I'm not just doing repetitive work, I'm learning something. And the person on the top can actually have more responsibility and actually support the growth in the career and the personal development of the individual.
Definitely. I think it would be great to I think that's what we're talking about here, is a recontextualizing of everything you do and everything being a certain value that sort of builds up and has a certain direction. I think it was a really great point to make. So the other part I wanted to bring into this as well is something that Alvin Turner said around innovation and where to start. So it goes a little bit along the lines of when we talk about how people learn and feedback and the value of failing, all these things. So let's quickly listen to what Alvin has to say.
That's the thing for me, is get people doing this as quickly as possible. And, you know, I can stand up for a week, and as you guys could, and teach on this stuff. For most people with the best will in the world, just like learning anything, you know, you're only going to remember 10% of it. So the quicker that you can get on and start getting your hands dirty with this, the better. So for me, it's less is more. Get people to a point where they can do just enough to do an experiment, and then coach them through those first few iterations so that they can understand what a good experiment looks like, what a less good experiment looks like, what data is helpful, what data is theatre, and help them become good or proficient at running experiments, particularly in their context. And one of the things that I find is happening more and more is not just teaching the experimentation, but a little bit further down into the process, when they've been running some tests, is how to play back those tests. So the stakeholder engagement piece, to a point where they're more likely to say yes, or at least give you some time to get it to the next step. So that would be at a team level. And to be honest, the other context is in leadership development programs, where you've got often organizational development people or learning and development, leadership development people who look across the organization, look to the future and say, oh my goodness, we are just not there from an innovation capability. The leadership team doesn't really seem to get how much we need this. With the authority I have, I need to create some kind of program that is going to set this thing on fire.
Yeah, so I think the interesting part that he was talking about, so as we talked about learning, is that I think we're all aware that both leadership and the teams need to learn new things and need to constantly learn. And we said previously that they have to admit that they don't know everything. And I think that's a really great starting point. And innovation or progress can essentially happen from both sides. Either it's leadership supported or it comes from the ground up. But it's possible in both ways. And I think that's Alvin's main point. And I think that's a point I would totally support.
Yeah, and you know, I'm never shy of an opinion or two, but I've kind of taken a few companies to task over the years saying, look, you really don't want innovation. What you really want is process improvement. What you really want is, you know, ideation on brightly colored beanbags, or you want invention and getting clear on what innovation really is. And I think what Alvin kind of helped me come to point was understanding innovation can start off really small. You know, the little tiny seed that puts on one green shoot. You don't just stomp it because it's not perfect. You give it a little extra water, you give it a little more sunshine, and you help it grow and help people kind of grow their innovation muscle to the point that they're actually doing disruptive innovation, even if at the very beginning, all they're doing is simplistic process improvement. And so, okay, I admit it. I need to give people more slack, but hey, I'm human.
One step at a time, exactly.
Well, we've kind of covered the 7 books, but let's talk about kind of the big kind of pull togethers, because we spent a good fair few hours kind of looking at how many different things we pulled from not only the books, but from the authors. And then, as we say in the podcast, over 40 years of experience between us. What's the big takeaway this time?
Yes, so the thing, the way I like to take it away is, and I'm being quite selfish here, but you know, the reason why I wrote the book about wicked companies and wicked problems is trying to really define a simple narrative that ties things together. And I think we've seen in all the 7 books a lot of different pieces. We just talked through a couple of themes, and they all actually tie in really neatly into exactly that model, or they tie neatly into a world where we know wicked problems exist. And it's probably 3 things. Take the why before the how. So really understand why you're doing what you're doing, which means that you need to a lot know more and focus more on what is the problem, describing the problem space, because you're likely as an organization at this point, you're not exploring the whole problem space. Not exploring the whole problem space means you're not exploring the whole opportunity space. So you end up with lower margins, with not as happy customers, all of that. You're not creating the value you could. Even so, sticking to the essence of your organization. I strongly believe, and I've seen it, and I would have some examples on that, to say you can have a updated why that's not a tame problem why anymore, but a wicked problem why, and rejuvenate yourself as an organization and redefine the purpose of what you want to do. So why before how? Figure this one out. Align yourself to a wicked problem. The second one then is, love the problem, not the solution. Your solutions will not be the same in 3-6 months, because you will experiment, iterate, learn new things, and you will discover new types of customers and understand them better and different types of behaviors. So you will play around with a lot of things in order to make it better, grow over time, create potentially exponential value for your company. How do you do that? Well, the best case we have at the moment, and that's sort of what you do when you have a moving target and you're often fishing in the dark. And I'm saying fishing in the dark because one of the characteristics of wicked problems is that you will never have enough information to fully understand it. So you have to work with what you have, and you have to try. How do you try? You experiment in a very scaled down version, small step, as you said before, with commenting on Alvin's. Experimentation is this. The most progressive companies at the moment, like Amazon, define themselves through, we're great because we're trying 1,000 things a year. That's why. The money makers are the 2-3 things we find that are exponentially better than all the other stuff, which are failures, but value and learning, and that get us to those 2-3 things. So it's experimentation. So those are essentially the 3 things. What's the problem? Embrace it, forget about solution, therefore actually be more effective than efficient. And experiment is the means to get to it. And that tackles the main characteristics of a wicked problem, which is you won't have enough information ever. There will never be a perfect solution, so you just have to up it a bit. And it's a moving target. So you're going to be flexible through experimentation and a shift in governance to tackle it. That's it in a bucket, I guess.
And the most important thing to be able to do everything that we're talking about is the people. The people that have to be enabled to do these things, the people that have to be comfortable taking risks, the people that have to understand the clarity and understand the vision, the people who have to want to experiment, the people who have to understand failing forward and learning and sharing the information with the organization. So all of the 2 things I think kind of boil down to, as you say, ask the right questions, love the problem, not the solution, and enable the organization, the people from all levels, from top to bottom, to be able to execute.
Exactly. So this is essentially it, and I think this is where it, yet again, is quite interesting. So I'm throwing this question out there because to some of our listeners, and I hope we're going to get some comments back, because I have been in this situation many times when you say, so when we say, love the problem, not the solution. Who is mainly working on the problem? It's more people than systems or tools, right? So we've been living in this narrative that we think, the technology will just solve it. But the technology has never ever been as flexible as the creativity of people. So however long you talk about AI and automation, we will automate things. But I think it will just enable us as creative thinkers, as everyone, as a person with a brain, to do more things, try more things, test more things. And those tools will enable us. I don't think we're going to lose jobs, to be honest. Some things will be automated, but we will create tons of new jobs that are going to be enabled by new tool and technologies. Because, let's face it, have you ever had a tool on your computer that was good enough to really evolve with you? For me, that was never true. And I remember how many companies are selling tools where they say, well, have that analytics system or that thing and that system. And you just put it in there and it's going to work. It's like, it was never quite that. You ended up, most of your time, keep tweaking it and, shaping it into a thing you could actually use. And in a year's time, it was already, yet again, not good enough. So these kind of things, if that's the tools we have, and some are amazing tools that really help us automate, accelerate things and throw out 1,000 variations of a design or code or whatever. So as much as I love technology, I have to say, in my own experience and what I have seen is that don't rely on a piece of technology to help you for a longer time. There will be another piece happening in a year or two's time. That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because those things don't update themselves that quickly and easier. So, as a person, as someone with a brain, as a creative person, I think everyone's creative to some extent. I really believe that you should be able to be out there and grab any tool you like to help you as best as it can. And companies should embrace that and enable people through that. That's sort of my thinking towards that, in particular in COVID-19 times, where we have to be more creative than ever. But that thing will come from people. It will not come from replacing people with tools. It just won't.
No, I agree with you. I was sitting here kind of drawing some other parallels. You know, when someone plays the piano, they're playing the piano to evoke emotion. And the piano is just a tool. And the piano of the 17th century, you know, the harpsichord, and the piano today, and the piano of synthesizers of tomorrow, they're just tools. And yes, they're evolving and they're getting better, but it's not the technology that matters. It's what you can do with the technology that matters. You can more rapidly create an emotion. You can more rapidly and effectively communicate an emotion. You know, I've got a bachelor's in computer science. I've been a tech kind of geeky guy for a long time, but I also believe the best technology is invisible. What matters is what you can do with the technology. And so, yeah, some people are worried that technology is going to make their jobs redundant. But that's part of change, and you know, change is not painful, but fighting change is. So people are going to need to have some level of adapting to the new world. Technology evolves, pandemics evolve, companies evolve, so do people.
Yeah, and those things don't even work or need to be that flexible even in the short term. So I was talking to someone yesterday about the whole Spotify model of how teams use processes and tools, and basically said like every team uses slightly different processes, slightly different tools, because that works for them best and they become more effective. There's even more evidence to that when you read Reinventing Organizations, where they talked about local managers or local teams and then bigger area managers, or when companies have the tendency to go and say, well, you know, we want to have everything cookie cutter. Everyone's going to use the same tool, going to buy the same tool for absolutely everyone. Well, there's a big example I have from BT where they try to implement a tool across the globe, only to realize that actually different markets need different tools, and there's no benefit in training half of India or all their people over in India on a new tool, spending millions for no extra benefit. So, and I've seen it again and again. Again, the BT project was the same thing. You know, we had 14 teams there, and we built the process for the first 3, and then we started to iterate, and then we let them use it as much as they could. And some could actually progress quicker by cutting out a few tools, because they actually had a product that was already at a different stage. And you need that flexibility. Otherwise, you punch them through the same process with no benefit, because you're suddenly losing time and money and effort, and you're running people into the ground just applying to it, saying, do it because I say so, rather than do it the best way you can.
But if we pull back to the very, very top of our show today, what you're describing is people measuring efficiency. And efficiency is having the same tool everywhere. It's much more efficient, as opposed to measuring effectiveness, which is the right teams using the right tools for maximum effectiveness.
Yes, and I think when I was listening to Tom Peters again today to pull out that one audio example we had, he said, like, you know, he's now been listening to people trying to measure effectiveness on Zoom calls, trying to understand when they are, how many hours they spend on Zoom calls and whatnot. And you just gave an example as well, like not just on the hours. Did you not say something about not just the hours on the Zoom call, but actually when, at which time?
No, I was talking about someone else who was required to report to their boss on a timesheet, not just how many hours they were spending every day, but was it between 9 and 12, between 12 and 3? What were the actual times they were spending? Which is like, it just beggars belief.
It's insane. I would love to hear the justification of why that is even relevant. And you know, for me as someone who's brought up in a creative background, there's some oddity about a lot of creative people I know who work best in the evenings and into the night. So actually our 9 to 5, we start around 5 to 6, and then we get very productive. That's the best time for us. If someone would force us to do the same stuff in the morning, it just wouldn't make any sense to us, and we would fight it, and it would be uncomfortable, we would be unhappy, and you know, and we wouldn't get, they wouldn't get the best out of it. So everybody loses on these kind of odd approaches to like efficiency rather than looking for the effectiveness of things.
Yeah, but 4 years ago, I stopped doing consulting on a day rate basis because I don't want to sell days of my life. And as a strategist, as a business strategist, whether I'm doing blockchain strategy or startup strategy or enterprise strategy, the ideas come to me at all kinds of times in the day, in the night, on the weekend, when I'm going out for exercise, when I'm standing in the shower, and I can't bill you for that particular minute that will save you hundreds of thousands, because I wasn't at my desk between 9 and 6 when that idea hit my head. It's not the way it works.
Yeah, I'm also wondering if that's more of a malady of middle management that are driven by different measurements or the
You
wrong
mean
measurements.
KPIs and OKRs that they have to measure themselves by?
Yeah, instead of actually, I think if I would, given my experience with talking with C-level leadership, they don't care where it's coming from as long as it happens. And the teams down below know that too. It seems to be a problem somewhere in this middle ground where things are getting quite abstracted. And the value in the middle actually doesn't matter, but obviously a lot of people have roles there, so they need to justify that value or a different kind of value that really doesn't always contribute to the outcome. And so it's another one of these things that just probably should be revisited, really. And it's not by surprise that a lot of companies who do big transformation projects to become more progressive start taking out management levels, because they don't really add any value to it.
Well, Marcus, this has been a lot of fun over the last almost 9 weeks that we've been doing this, and first time I've ever done a podcast, and with a great co-host. So thank you very much for all of your kind of help along the way and all the great post-production as well. If you're listening to the podcast, be sure and download some of the great slides that we've included with the highlights that you can use in some of your own presentations when you're talking to both your teams, but also to your own senior leadership.
Absolutely. So far as it goes to season 1, yes, my first podcast as well. So thank you, Troy. It's always been fun, and thanks to all the authors that we had that made time for us. It's been very interesting to think about it from different angles, and I'm really looking forward for season 2. We already recorded 3 to 4 episodes of the next season, so a little bit ahead this time, rather than chasing books and continuously begging people to spare an hour for us. It's been great. I hope it's going to be even better. I hope this particular episode was also of great value to everyone out there. Really helps if you subscribe and you like and comment back to us. If you have any question, be in touch. That's what we're here for. I know we're not always as succinct as we should be, and there's probably another 100 questions out there. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with us to help you or answer any questions you would have.
And with that, that's a wrap on season 1. Be sure and check the show notes for full details and links to all the individual podcasts, as well as the names of the books and the authors. You can find us on thewickedpodcast.podomatic.com, as well as on iTunes and on Spotify. Be sure and check for both Twitter and LinkedIn for Marcus and myself and The Wicked Company. And don't forget to read Marcus's own book, The Wicked Company.
See you next time. Thank you for listening to The Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. You can find all relevant links and a way to contact us in the description. And please like, share, and subscribe, and we hope we see you next time.